Hey there, and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you do not have to. I'm Aaron Maté. Katie Halper is on the road this week, so sitting in for her is friend of the show, making his Useful Idiots Monday morning debut, independent journalist Michael Tracey. Good morning, Michael.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
It's great to see you here. Now, you recently just came back from a trip overseas.
I did, yeah. I was in Belgium. I went to the European Union mega complex. I don't know if you've ever witnessed that, Aaron, but it's a sprawling, glimmering, sheening tribute to, I guess, European democracy and unity and whatnot. And so they have one of their many emergency summits and meetings, and you could hardly even tell most of the time like which specific entity is convening the meeting, because there's the European Council and the European Parliament and the European Commission, and they all fall under the umbrella of this supranational structure. And I think like half the people even who like work for the European Union can't distinguish these things half the time. And yeah, it was a lot of grandiose statements about Ukraine. Obviously, that was the key impetus for the meeting. And a lot of the times, these meetings don't have much substantive impact on anything other than providing an opportunity for like a confab for the European member states. And it's typically focused on, if you look at the media coverage, the obstinacy, so-called, of Hungary, which, particularly on Ukraine, is always a thorn in the side of the rest of the union. It had been thought that Slovakia might play a similar role now, because the head of government there, Robert Fico, is also a Ukraine skeptic, but apparently he did not make much of an effort to disrupt things. But the end result of this council special summit, and by the way, I saw Zelensky in person, so I feel very fortunate for having gotten that experience. But the end result of the summit was twofold. There were two separate statements that were issued, and Hungary actually fully signed on to the first one, which is basically providing new funding and debt acquisition instruments for the EU to facilitate increased defense spending, which is something that Trump is constantly agitating for. So for all the talk about how there's this like big rupture in the transatlantic alliance, the European member states and Trump seem to agree on this need to rapidly rearm and mobilize their defense sectors, which I find to be a bit weird in terms of the consensus with which that view is promoted. Like, ostensibly, one of the main purposes of even the formation of the European Union and these kind of supernatural bodies was to create like a conciliatory arrangement so European countries did not have to really engage on issues of war and peace in the same way that they had for the preceding hundreds of years when the continent was riven by conflict. But everybody supports rapid rearmament now, and the key probably policy issue there that came out of it was that Germany, with an incoming chancellor, although Scholz, the outgoing chancellor, was still the one who presided at this meeting, has agreed to loosen its fiscal policy. And previously, Germany had been very fiscally conservative compared to other countries in Europe, like Spain or Italy, France, in order to allow for the acquisition of debt to finance this rearmament. Now, people might cast this aside as kind of maybe a long-range issue, but I think it's, I mean, meaning it couldn't have that necessarily an acute impact on
10
war in
more
Ukraine.
seconds, 10 more seconds for this tangent. Before
Okay, sorry. So anyway, yeah, that was the point. And Europe is rapidly rearming, and I talked briefly to basically the equivalent of the Speaker of the House of the European Parliament. And I noted that she's from Malta, which I mean, how many divisions does Malta have in terms of military readiness? But anyway, she repeated this cliche. Finally, what we want to maintain is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, which was the Blinken Biden mantra.
Yes.
So these people still can't get out of the mindset where, for the past 3 years, we've all been taught that agency of the main power brokers in the dynamic, meaning the U.S., is being displaced onto Ukraine, and the U.S. doesn't play any independent policymaking role. These European kind of Eurocrats want to cling to that, and that's embodied by them just reciting these same cliches that have kind of been worn out.
Well, we'll see how that plays out, especially with Trump now talking about ending the war. But you've even been skeptical of that as well. So we'll get to that today. A few items I want to mention that are not covered on the Sunday morning news shows that I think deserve attention. First of all, in Syria, there's been a wave of sectarian massacres by forces loyal to the new government. Who could have predicted that a government ruled by an Al-Qaeda offshoot, led by the former leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, the former deputy leader of ISIS, is not presiding over a wave of sectarian killings on the Syrian coast, mostly targeting Alawites and Christians. So that's been going on. It wasn't covered on the Sunday morning news shows because everyone's moved on now from Syria.
It was covered on Fox News Sunday briefly, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I apologize to Fox News Sunday for
just sticking up for.
Yes.
And
the other issue, a big story in the U.S. is a Columbia student who's in the U.S. on a green card, whose wife is 8 months pregnant, a U.S. citizen. The Trump administration has ordered him just basically snatched off the street and deported because he's engaged in pro-Palestine activism on campus at Columbia. And Marco Rubio basically declared that he was sympathetic to Hamas, or was agitating on behalf of Hamas, and that's why he's being deported, despite there being no evidence for that. Blatant attack on free speech. But the Trump administration, which campaigned in part of being supportive of free speech, seems to have no problem violating that basic right and sending a person into deportation simply for speaking up for Palestine. So that's a story we'll be watching a lot more on the show, but we're not covering today anymore because it wasn't covered on the seminar news show. In fairness to them, I think the news dropped afterwards. So
just a quick point on that, Aaron. And I know we're supposed to keep things snappy. I'll keep it very quick. I'll have a mental timer for 15 seconds. But one thing that bothered me about the whole 2024 campaign, and especially this podcaster class that was very pro-Trump and basically had venerated people like RFK Jr., was their proclamations that restoring Republican executive power was going to be tantamount to the restoration of free speech, was hardly ever challenged, especially when simultaneously Trump and his entire cohort were very explicit in pledging that they were going to use the coercive power of the state to crack down on speech that was unduly critical of Israel in their judgment. So I feel like none of this is particularly unexpected or even inconsistent with how they campaigned, but people got a false impression of what the policy agenda would be based on some of these, I think, unintelligent kind of podcaster class discourses.
Totally agree. And this Columbia student's name is Mahmoud Khalil. There's protests going on in New York City today to have him freed, and I'm sure other places as well. So that will be a major issue, and it will have to go to court. And will the Trump administration be able to simply deport someone because they don't like what he says about the genocide of Palestinians, the mass murder of Palestinians? We will see, but certainly a really, really important story. All right, let's turn to our Sunday morning news recap, starting off with Meet the Depressed.
Good Sunday morning. A battle is brewing on Capitol Hill with the government set to run out of money in just 6 days. It comes on the heels of a volatile week from Wall Street to Main Street, with confusion over President Trump's shifting tariff policy, more spending cuts, and uncertainty about the economy. The president and his allies have now begun to warn that some economic pain could be ahead for Americans.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much.
On Thursday, the president announced he was delaying 25% tariffs on many imports from Mexico and some from Canada for a month, with concerns mounting about the potential economic impacts of a wider trade war.
You know, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but it strikes me that announcing tariffs, then delaying tariffs, isn't that going to create some volatility in the markets? I mean, isn't that a fair thing to expect?
I mean, it already has.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing, though, that I do find a bit rich is that many of these Sunday show intros, which I took the liberty of watching for all you people, although I probably would have anyway, dwelled on this idea that the stock market went down because of the volatility engendered by this kind of haphazard tariff policy. And so I just find it a bit annoying that when the stock market gets invoked as just like a method of concern trolling Trump or any other president. I mean, you could imagine theoretically like a left-wing president wanting to introduce some kind of like industrial policy that would create some intermittent disruption in the financial markets or on Wall Street, but that would be a necessary prerequisite for introducing the policy, and maybe the reaction being a little bit different. So I think there's some legitimate critiques, like what is the end goal of this tariff policy? Does Trump really want to annex Canada? Like, I don't understand like what the end goal is envisioned to be, really. So that's worthy of interrogation, but citing the stock market over and over, or just as this kind of petty means of bludgeoning Trump, I find a little bit dubious.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
After Target CEO warned consumers would likely see price increases over the next couple of days, and Best Buy's chief called price increases highly likely. Across the board, tariffs on two of America's three largest trading partners have been on and then off and then on and then off again, with a whiplash effect for businesses and consumers.
One day the tariffs are on, the next day they're off. Right now the markets, as you know well, prefer stability. Are you done going forward with the pauses and the carve-outs? Is that it for those?
There'll always be changes and adjustments.
CEOs want to see predictability. They say, look, I have to speak with shareholders. I've got to make plans for CapEx spending. I can't if it's 20% one day and then it's off for a month and it's 25%.
Yeah.
So can you give us a sense of whether or not we are going to get clarity for the business community?
Well, I think so. But, you know, the tariffs could go up as time goes by, and they may go up. And, you know, I don't know if it's predictability. I think
so. That's not clarity.
No.
Top administration officials have started to hint some economic pain may be ahead.
There's going to be a short period of time where there'll be some higher prices on certain products. It's not inflation. That's nonsense.
Could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure. And look, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending.
Meanwhile, at the White House, frustration.
And what does he mean by moving from public spending to private spending? That part I don't understand.
Well, I mean, and also Lutnick's comment there that they clipped out is pretty funny. I guess I'm not enough of an economics genius to understand how prices going up is actually not inflation. Like, I thought that was kind of the definition of inflation, but they're saying essentially that the prices on certain goods are going to be going up for a just cause. So it's like necessary and worthwhile inflation, but they don't want to use the word inflation because it's politically incendiary. And then, yeah, I mean, transitioning to public versus private spending, but just basically means austerity. It just means mass privatization of public functions. And they're saying that in order to adapt to that, we have to brace for some short-term economic pain. So that's essentially what that means, I think.
Now, you followed the campaign pretty closely. Is it fair to say that Trump did campaign on tariffs? He did promise these tariffs?
Yeah, but not, as usual, in the most precise way that I think would hammer home what the immediate impact would be. He didn't, as far as I remember, ever campaign on launching a trade war against Canada.
No, he didn't. No.
Especially because he would, on the other hand, because, you know, Trump will say a million things that contradict one another, and you can never really discern a consistent through line. But the trade war against Canada is especially odd because Trump had been touting that his first term achievement of this USMCA trade deal, basically a successor to NAFTA, was the greatest deal of all time. This is what Canadian officials have said to try to rebut Trump in his recent claims about why these tariffs are needed. We just got done negotiating what you said was going to be this brilliant world historical trade deal. So I don't know that the specifics were ever delineated. I mean, he's always kind of given indications that he believes that we should have free trade, but it's got to be fair trade, which is just a cliche, but does seem to presuppose that some tariffs and other kind of state interventionist methods in the economy are acceptable and even advisable in his judgment. So, but we know, but that I think people might have assumed that that would be around China or not necessarily, making it so that all of a sudden Kentucky bourbon distillers are going to have their products removed from the Canadian market as a result of Trump's economic policy. So I don't think that was ever spelled out.
I mean, I will say this: Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, the United Automobile Workers, he supports these tariffs. He thinks this is good for his workers. So the issue is, granted, it's a little complicated, but certainly, did Trump campaign on launching a trade war with Canada in order to annex it? Absolutely not. That's that's another curveball. Okay. Let's hear more from Meet the Depressed.
Nations growing behind the scenes amid reports of a contentious cabinet meeting where secretaries, including Secretaries Rubio and Duffy, clashed with billionaire Elon Musk. NBC News has confirmed the account, first reported by the New York Times, that some of the president's cabinet secretaries challenged Musk over his approach to cuts in their departments.
And details have come out about your cabinet meeting with Elon Musk and some clashes potentially between Secretary Rubio and Secretary Duffy.
No clash. I was there. You're just a troublemaker. And you're not supposed to be asking that question because we're talking about the World Cup. Elon gets along great with Marco, and they're both doing a fantastic job. There is no clash.
Trump is only taking questions on the World Cup at this time. Do not ask him about the unelected billionaire who is taking an axe to the government and might even be clashing with other cabinet members in the process. Fair enough. I mean, if I was a cabinet member, would I want this obnoxious billionaire, mega billionaire coming in and just demanding my employees tell him what they did last week? So
I always think billionaire is not the right word to describe Musk.
Right.
He's literally the richest person on earth.
So rich. Yeah.
Who's playing an incredibly outsized role in dictating government policy, and nobody even knows exactly what his position is. They've claimed that he's a special government employee, but it's kind of a strange carve out. He's apparently not subject to congressional oversight.
No.
There's no indication that he'll comply with any subpoenas or testify before Congress. So he's just operating in this netherworld of government power that I don't know a great parallel to historically. So yeah, I think inevitably that will create some potential clashes with other departments that are kind of more normal and duly constituted, like the State Department.
And great job, Democrats, not even winning the House or the Senate. So they don't even have subpoena power right now, even if they wanted to, even if they wanted to.
Right, but it would be customary probably for somebody of this amount of power to voluntarily appear before Congress. And I see very little indication that seems like a plausible thing for Musk to do, although who knows? He's pretty mercurial.
I certainly don't see the Republicans dragging Elon Musk before them. And that's unfortunate. That's really...
Oh, so I like the idea Trump is just so interested in the World Cup that he's not going to entertain other questions on it. He's just such a big international soccer fan now that he wants to keep everybody focused on that issue.
Economy and concerns about high prices helped propel President Trump to the Oval Office, with Mr. Trump promising change.
From the day I take the oath of office, we will rapidly drive prices down and make America affordable again. We're going to get your energy prices down by 50%. Starting on day one, we will end inflation and make America affordable again. A vote for Trump means your groceries will be cheaper, and we're going to have prices down. I think you're going to see some pretty drastic price reductions.
The dizzying policy shifts on tariffs and concerns about the health of.
Just an update on Trump's campaign pledges. That has not happened yet at all.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like dumb campaign rhetoric. Like the president can wave a magic wand to make grocery prices go down. Obviously, that sounds appealing, especially if you're out of power and you can just saddle the incumbent administration with every economic ill. And there's a legitimate critique that could be made about the Biden administration's economic policy. But of course, Trump has this thing where he famously said, "I alone can fix it" in 2016. It was kind of taken a little bit out of context, but still, he does have this belief in his personal, almost like supernatural prowess to make everything great, and that runs up against reality. Again, though, just to underscore something, you mentioned Sean Fain of the United Auto Workers supports the tariff policy. I think that there's a reasonable point to be made that those people ought to be like the lodestars of whether this economic policy is good, as opposed to fluctuations on the financial markets, which is what all these shows are mostly concerned trolling Trump and his administration officials about.
Fair enough. I've learned something already today. I thought I put way too much faith in the markets, and I'll never be following them ever again.
Well, we know you're a Wall Street titan.
Oh yes,
investor.
Yes. I love what's his name, Milton Friedman. He's my lodestar.
I like the Laffer curve, Art Laffer.
The economy produced one of the worst weeks on Wall Street in months. Steve Kornacki is here to take us through all the numbers.
All right, well, sorry to teach
you.
you.
Worst week on Wall Street in months is still like virtually record high market levels, historic highs, but it's just down for like 2% from last November or something.
Yes.
So again, it's concern trollish.
Yes. Okay, let's turn to Trump. He was interviewed on Fox News, and a big issue for him remains him talking to Russia, cutting off military support to Ukraine, cutting off, I think even more importantly, intelligence support to Ukraine. So as of right now, Ukraine cannot launch strikes into Russia because those strikes were reliant on U.S. intelligence. And Trump has cut that off after his White House dust up with Zelensky. And he's still criticizing Zelensky. Here is Trump on the Ukrainian president.
He took money out of this country under Biden like candy from a baby. It was so easy with that same attitude. And I just don't think he's grateful. We gave him, in my opinion, $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. We gave him $350 billion, and he's talking about the fact that they have fought, and there's a bravery because somebody has to use the weapons. But without those weapons, don't forget, I was the one that gave him the javelins that was able to knock down all the tanks. Obama gave.
I think Trump is saying that the U.S. spending a lot of money is a bigger sacrifice than Ukraine losing hundreds of thousands of people. That's what I'm hearing from him here. Like, yeah, sure.
I don't know if he's quite saying that, but he's just saying, look, yeah, maybe they're brave, but they're only able to like actualize their bravery because of U.S. largesse, and Biden just handed them money without getting anything in return. Hence this so-called minerals deal, which I think is actually much more sweeping than people maybe have appreciated. The reason why, I was in Europe and Zelensky has been conferring with these European leaders is because they're all very intent on finalizing this minerals deal, which may actually happen this week. But minerals deal is a misnomer. It's the U.S. basically in a quasi-colonial arrangement seizing a huge swath of Ukrainian natural resources and state assets, including physical infrastructure. So to the extent that Biden, Trump is complaining about how Biden handled this disbursement of funds to Ukraine, is because the U.S. got nothing in return. So this is the way to solve that issue, according to Trump.
And Trump is giving Ukraine nothing in return. Zelensky keeps talking about security guarantees, but Trump is not promising that. He's not even promising, at least right now anymore, a continued flow of U.S. weapons. That wasn't even in the minerals deal. Although at the White House, as you pointed out, he did say we're going to keep arming Ukraine.
Well, the irony is that before the fateful White House dust-up, which
Yeah.
was a charitable way of putting it, Trump was repeatedly pledging that the flow of U.S. weapons would continue, basically the status quo would persist in terms of U.S. weapons provision. But then Zelensky decided to throw a little bit of a tantrum, and then that sent everything sideways. So
Zelensky's a great lesson in don't believe your own press clippings. So even though Time Magazine calls you the person of the year, even though a bipartisan Congress gives you a standing ovation, calls you the second coming of Winston Churchill, don't believe your own hype, because I think that proved disastrous for him when he, challenged J.D. Vance, when J.D. Vance called for diplomacy, and the meltdown ensued, and now he's in trouble. He's in serious trouble.
But if you'll notice, like, Trump still gets offended when it's not properly acknowledged that he sent the Javelin missiles to Ukraine in 2017.
Yeah.
And he favorably contrasts his more bellicose posture toward Russia with that of Obama, who only sent sheets and blankets.
Yes.
So I have no clue why Zelensky didn't if he had the most minimally competent political advisors, or maybe even translators, because I think there was kind of a weird language barrier thing going on in that meeting as well. Just kiss Trump's ass. If you want to just maintain the status quo policy-wise, kiss Trump's ass on the Javelin missile thing.
Yeah.
So he feels appreciated. I mean, it's kind of an infantile way to approach diplomacy. Nonetheless, that seemed like it would have been the far more obvious course of action, rather than trying to instigate a debate with J.D. Vance when you aren't even a fluent English speaker.
Not good statecraft. Not very good statecraft right there by Zelensky. All right, let's hear more from Trump. He was asked what the consequences might be if the U.S. continues cutting off support to Ukraine.
Are you comfortable with that? The fact that you walked away and Ukraine may not survive?
Well, it may not survive anyway, but, we have some weaknesses with Russia. It takes two. Look, it was not going to happen, that war, and it happened. So now we're stuck with this mess.
What does "we have some weaknesses with Russia" mean?
I think he's saying that, even if Ukraine doesn't survive, maybe we could still hurt Russia too, or something.
I think what he's saying is Russia has some vulnerabilities that we can exploit.
Yeah.
And Trump did threaten to impose additional sanctions on Russia last week. I'm not sure what other sanctions are available, although I do know that it's been floated that maybe the U.S. could target the Russian oil state oil companies, and I guess maybe some more banking sanctions.
But if you target Russian energy, that will raise prices even more for ordinary Americans. I don't see how Trump can get away with that after he campaigns on.
Well, I mean, Biden was willing to accept some temporary or partial, economic pain in order to pursue his larger political or ideological goals around this conflict. So, I mean, Trump has suggested that he's willing to tolerate that with respect to the tariff policy.
Right.
So maybe he has some tolerance for it in this area.
Okay. Well, Trump also recently talked about.
Trump is not Trump. I mean, unless he abolishes the 22nd Amendment, which I know a lot of New York Times liberals think he's on the cusp of doing. He's not running for re-election again. So he has a lot more political latitude here, particularly around the economy, to maybe pursue things that could create an economic adverse impact.
Right. Okay. Well, Trump was also recently talking about cutting the Pentagon budget and even talked about a joint pact with China and Russia, in which, all these countries cut their military spending in half. And he was asked about that also by Fox News.
You wanted to do the Golden Dome. You've got a lot of ideas for America. But then earlier you said you wanted to cut $1 trillion in defense spending, right?
I didn't say I was.
You did not get. So I was like, which is it? Are you cutting defense spending, or are you building us up?
I never said defense spending.
Okay, because I think you were talking about denuclearization, and that's where the cutting of the spending came in.
I never said cut. No, it's not in these days. I'd love to cut defense spending, but not now, because you have China.
He did say he wanted to cut military spending. He talked about agreeing with Russia and China. This was really exciting. People got excited by this. He said he wanted to have sit down with Russia and China and cut military spending by half. And now all of a sudden he forgot he said that.
I think people overread that initial comment. I think Trump was expressing what a lot of American presidents have expressed, including, I remember Barack Obama, one of his big issues, and he gave, these well-received speeches around the world about it, was nuclear
Yes.
non-proliferation. His aspiration was eliminating all nuclear weapons in the world, if possible. He even focused on it to some degree in the Senate, and then he spearheaded this massive refurbishment or modernization is the euphemism they use to update the U.S. nuclear arsenal for hundreds of billions or like trillions of dollars, whatever the number was. It's hard to even calculate what the total amount is on the nuclear arsenal. And so I think Trump was expressing a version of that, but that's entirely separate from the short-term budget process. And Trump has been endorsing endorsed the House Republican budget resolution, which increases defense spending by $100 billion, and it's probably going to go up when it gets reconciled with the Senate. And if you notice, Trump is weirdly bewildered and indignant that Maria Bartiromo would suggest that he might have at one point called for cutting defense spending. And I think he's somewhat sincere about that, because Trump has never been in favor of cutting defense spending. It's high defense spending now, and then maybe at some later date, we can come up with some international arrangement to diminish the nuclear stockpiles, which is a little bit pie in the sky, perhaps.
But he literally said, I want to sit down with Russia and China and talk about cutting our military budget. They're way too high. So people understandably thought that was significant. Now,
but as usual, you got to contrast that with what budget is he currently supporting to pass the Congress that's actually going to provide the appropriations for what the Pentagon does.
Sure. And it's similar to Medicaid, where they're we're not touching Medicaid, but then the budget calls for cutting $880 billion from the committee that oversees Medicaid, and the only way they can reach their goals is to cut Medicaid. So,
and they said they're going to reap the savings by cutting the so-called deep state, which means cutting credit card regulators. Regulators of credit card companies, that's the new deep state.
That's the deep state, right?
So they're going to save a lot of money by getting rid of those people, so people can't have to pay higher interest rates or something.
You have Russia.
Yeah,
you have a
glad to
lot
hear
of
you say that,
problems out there. No.
In fact,
no. What I have said is, we spend a lot of money on nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons. The level of destruction is beyond anything you can even imagine. It's just bad that everybody has to spend all this money on something that, if it's used, it's probably the end of the world.
Wow.
Wow. Her mind is blown that nuclear weapons could destroy the world. Well, okay.
Yeah, she never thought about that before. I guess.
No.
It just occurred to her.
It takes the wisdom of Trump to open up her mind to the fact that nuclear weapons could destroy the planet. She couldn't get that from anybody else.
Maria Bartiromo is low key one of the most pernicious television personalities. I watched that entire interview, and every question that she asked Trump was from a more kind of interventionist sort of default perspective. She's just a spokesperson for Wall Street, which is why she was kind of chiding Trump about the volatility in the markets. Yes. Obviously, Trump still loves her and, invited her to the Roosevelt Room for this special interview. But sometimes Bartiromo gets underrated in terms of how slightly craven she is.
All right. Well, let's hear from Fiona Hill. She's an old favorite of ours, Michael, because she was a central figure in the impeachment scandal, Trump's first impeachment.
The long forgotten first impeachment.
Yes. When Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi thought it was a genius idea to impeach Trump because he paused some weapons to Ukraine while Rudy Giuliani was pressuring Ukraine to announce investigation into the Bidens. And Fiona Hill was one of the Trump officials who spoke out against the freezing of Ukraine, who told us this was going to endanger our national security. And of course, what was the result of that impeachment? It was, more bipartisan support for the proxy war then ongoing in Ukraine, and also giving Trump the highest approval ratings of his presidency. That's how he ended the first impeachment. So anyway, Fiona Hill is back to opine on Trump's decision to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine. And it's not all intelligence. The U.S. still helps Ukraine defend itself from Russian attacks, but the U.S. is no longer helping Ukraine launch strikes inside of Russia. So
but do we know that for sure, Aaron? I mean, has it been fully articulated, like which elements of the intelligence sharing have been paused and which haven't?
Well,
I think it's a lot of speculative guesswork.
I just told you which elements they were, and you don't trust me as a source.
Oh, okay. I trust you.
No, I mean this is what I've read in news accounts, and I think it's accurate. It makes sense. They're still, they've cut off commercial satellite imagery. They're basically not helping them launch into Russia, which Trump did say he was against.
Which Ukraine was continuing to do up until last week.
Sure, yeah.
So that intelligence sharing function was still activated until the White House meeting.
Until Zelensky offended Trump. Yes, yeah. Yes. All right, so here's Fiona Hill.
U.S. pauses of lethal intelligence sharing, including targeting data for U.S.-provided weapons like HIMARS. We also know it extends to satellite imagery, which is no longer being shared with Ukraine. What's the practical impact of that and the military freeze?
Well, I think we can see the impact. It's certainly, on the one hand, emboldened Russia to really step up the attacks. And it's also not just blindsided, but also partially blinded Ukraine. I mean, we heard from the previous segment that there's still some sharing with allies like the United Kingdom, of course, which is part of the Five Eyes sharing with the United States. But frankly, none of the other allies, including the UK, have the same access to satellite imagery as the United States does. So even if there is, some sharing, not much restrictions, this certainly has an impact. And frankly, I think it's going to be an impetus to other allies to start stepping up their own capabilities and questioning themselves about the virtues of sharing with the United States. I mean, this is a two-way street. We have to remember that other countries also share pretty vital information.
This has been the big threat for a long time. It was also lodged when they were nominating Tulsi Gabbard, and we kept hearing, well, if you put her in charge of intelligence, our allies are not going to share vital intelligence with us anymore. It was like the big threat. I don't think it's that significant, but certainly it underscores that people are not happy that we're no longer helping Ukraine launch strikes deep into Russia, as if that was considered a really smart policy, that we'd be participating in attacks on a nuclear armed power.
And, not to be my typical curmudgeon-y self, but Trump did give remarks. I don't know if we have a clip, or there was a tweet that came out last night from a Reuters reporter where Trump was giving remarks on Air Force One, and he said, "We basically have the pause. The pause is going to be lifted soon." Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, or like what precisely he's referring to. But if this is really just a lot of sound and fury just to compel Ukraine to finalize the so-called minerals deal, and then we're going to revert back to the status quo ante, then I think maybe the significance of this is being a little bit overstated. But then again, you never know. I'll be open-minded as to what the ultimate impact is, but
we'll see. It seems to me, JD Vance, Trump, they're not ideologically committed to this Ukraine proxy war in the way Biden does. Are they going to go before Congress and ask for more money after vowing to shut this whole thing down? I doubt it, but you're right. Listen, Trump has broken his pledges so many times on so many issues that.
But he never made. But here's the thing: Trump never explicitly pledged to cut off funding for Ukraine. He criticized the manner in which that funding was appropriated under Biden because it was a bad deal for the United States. And Trump, when it looked like the minerals deal was about to be signed at that White House meeting, Trump was saying, "Look, this is great because now U.S. taxpayers understand that they're actually getting a bang for their buck, rather than unlike Biden when we were just giving away money like candy to a baby."
Yeah,
so
all true. Okay, let's move on. Congressmember Auchincloss, he's a Democrat. What is his first name? Jake Auchincloss.
Kennedy dynasty. So
Kennedy dynasty. Okay,
people might get excited about that.
Yes. Well, so here he is on Trump's dealings with Zelensky.
We were doing a town hall in the biggest city in my district. Democrats still do town halls. And this city voted for Donald Trump in 2024, first time in 100 years. The most resonant theme of the day that I heard from these Americans was how livid they are about the way that President Trump behaved in the Oval Office with Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky flew to Washington, but he walked into the Kremlin. And the propaganda that they heard from the commander-in-chief made Americans feel less safe and made them feel ashamed. This is an opportunity for congressional Republicans to distance themselves from this abomination and to demonstrate that Americans are going to stand for freedom and democracy. Because with all due respect, People do win wars. The United States won World War II. It made this world safe for freedom and democracy. We are now making it less safe for freedom and democracy by giving Russia all the cards that Donald Trump claims they have.
Well, I would add.
Okay, so, I mean, putting aside the comment about, Zelensky walked into the Kremlin, that's just old.
That reminds me of that 2017 Time magazine cover where, remember, there was like blood coming over St. Peter's Cathedral?
Yes, that's a classic.
I don't know. It's just like in that same genre of commentary.
But, I mean, you've made this point. What does Jake Auchincloss, whatever his name is, expect us to actually do to help Ukraine win? What is the actual plan? Like more of the same in which Ukraine loses hundreds of thousands of more people and more territory?
Well, what's funny to me is that Jake Auchincloss, and if memory serves, because I know way too much about the criminally overrated Kennedy dynasty, I can't remember the familial relationship. It was like Jackie Kennedy was married to Mr. Auchincloss or something, or maybe that's wrong. It doesn't matter. He's a Kennedy dynast, so he thinks that he's like standing up for this great legacy of America and defending freedom and democracy, and he's reinforcing this view because he's still holding town halls. And I think it's reasonable to chastise Republicans for refraining from holding town halls because they claim it's all Soros infiltrators and they can't tolerate being leveled with a mean comment. But he's getting this like reinforcement from these agitated liberals somewhere in Massachusetts showing up to town hall meetings to say how offended they are at the White House dust up, as you put it, with Zelensky. So obviously Democrats, like especially, pompously self-identified national security Democrats like Jake Auchincloss, are still refusing to do any revision whatsoever to their views on Ukraine policy after over 3 years. To me, like the utter recalcitrance of the Democrats to revisit anything on Ukraine is one of the most amazing political developments of this war. Not surprising, I guess, but still like perversely amazing. So that's sort of what I take away from his bombast there.
All right, let's move on to domestic issues. As we mentioned, Trump's new budget calls for cutting something like $880 billion by the committee that oversees Medicaid. So there's widespread fear that Trump wants to cut Medicaid, but Trump insists that he's not going to touch Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security.
When you look at where the spending is, 76% of the spending going to the mandatory programs, don't you have to really cut into those mandatory programs in order to really make a dent? You say you're going to balance the budget.
Yeah,
you can't balance the budget just by Doge cuts,
We're
right?
going to have growth like you've never seen before.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you said that.
We're going to have growth. I'm not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Now, we're going to get fraud out of there. You see where I talk about it all the time. We have people 250 years old and all,
So I'm not going to touch it, but we're going to get fraud out of there, which sounds like you are going to touch it, and you're going to claim that you're just cutting fraud while cutting people's benefits. That's what
which is a lot of what Doge has done anyway. I mean, Elon Musk will say that he discovered this rampant fraud, and what it turns out to be is an expenditure that he disagrees with. And maybe the basis for that disagreement is legitimate, but it's not fraud in the sense that it's some illicit or illegal use of funds, right? So they're kind of using that as a framework to justify all their cuts. And so it's easy to imagine Trump saying that the fraud is so rampant in Medicaid that I'm not cutting Medicaid, we're just getting rid of the fraud. So that's a way to kind of sell the cuts. But this is like very in keeping with what his pledges were in 2016, actually. We're not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We're going to do massive corporate tax cuts, and that's all going to be paid for by the explosive growth that the economy enjoys. And there was some growth in 2017 to 2021, but nowhere near to where it could have created a budget surplus, which is what Trump was promising. So, of course, the fiscal, and if you look at like the people like what Thomas Massey and such are saying about this new budget resolution, they're basically saying that this idea that this is going to result in some kind of restoration of fiscal order is totally nonsense. So if you actually care about that, then Trump is selling you another bill of goods,
Yeah.
especially because of the tax cuts coming.
Yeah, and especially because he won't even touch the Pentagon, as he just said. We just heard him say earlier.
He's boosting it. He's boosting it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's hear more from Trump. In the same interview, he would not rule out that a recession is coming.
Are rising worries about a slowdown. You've got the Atlanta Federal Reserve saying we're going to have a contraction in the first quarter. Look, I know that you inherited a mess, and you said that the other night.
I've only been here,
but are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time. But I think it should be great for us. I mean, I think it should be great. It's going to be great ultimately for the farmer, you know.
So he won't rule out a recession. And of course, had there been a recession under Biden, certainly there was inflation under Biden. And of course, Trump and the Republicans took advantage of that. But now he's saying there could be a recession under his watch.
And a recession was widely predicted to happen under Biden and then didn't. Or, I mean, I guess maybe there's a debate over whether the technical definition of a recession was met. I think maybe for 2 consecutive quarters, there was a decrease in growth or something, but it wasn't like as all-consuming of a recession as a lot of people had forecasted. But I think this gets to the political dynamic at play. Again, Trump does not have to run for re-election again. So his tolerance for economic pain is probably up if he sees it as in pursuit of whatever his wider ideological or political goals are. Now, those can be hard to define or nail down, but, you know, I think if he had to run for re-election in 4 years, he would probably be more unequivocal about saying under no circumstances will we allow a recession.
All right, let's skip ahead to Howard Lutnick. He is the Secretary of Commerce. And like many other people in the Trump administration, he has to contend with the fact that Trump promised to lower prices for everyday goods, including the price of groceries, on day one. And that has not happened. So this is Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. A question about that on Meet the Press.
When exactly can Americans expect to see those prices come way down?
Egg prices up 200% under Biden. Biden just killing chickens, trying to worry about things. It's crazy the way eggs have gone up 200%.
I'm not sure what he's referring to there with Biden killing chickens. Does he mean worrying about like bird flu? And that was a bad policy? Is that what he's saying?
I think
we slaughtered
so,
too many chickens.
yes.
We slaughtered too many chickens. Out of
He was just mass slaughtering chickens for no reason.
The Holocaust of chickens.
Let's not go there.
Donald Trump's going to bring the price of eggs down now. Donald Trump's tariffs are, here's the idea. All these other countries, like India, for instance, when Modi was in town, right? 1.4 billion people, and they won't buy a bushel of our corn. Europe, always blocking our farmers. As our farmers can sell more and more overseas, you're going to see the price of food in America come down. It's a volume thing. Well, I think the deal starts... The deal starts April 2nd. The deal starts April 2nd of reciprocal tariffs. The president is going to negotiate country by country. He's going to drive down other countries' barriers, unleashing our farmers, our ranchers, and our fishermen. They're going to explode in value, and the prices of American produce, row crops, produce, and fish are going to come down because our American industries are going to win around the world because finally, Donald Trump is behind them, protecting them. He's got their back, and he's going to make them winners. And that all of America is going to be winners because these prices are coming down, and the process starts April 2nd.
All right.
You heard it here first, April 2nd. That's when everything gets fixed. We're all going to be winners, according to Howard Lutnick.
Yeah, I think it was wasn't supposed to be March 4th originally, and now it's April 2nd. Again, a lot of this stuff is going to be rationalized as shrewd negotiating. It's almost like negotiating unto itself has become this fetish. Like, we just like negotiating for its own sake, even if nobody can really clarify what the end result is supposed to be. But that said, again, there has long been a protectionist argument that Trump has at least partially drawn on for protecting American industry from the global markets. And, in certain ways, Trump has been the successor to like the Ross Perot critique of the global trade paradigm. So, again, I think there is a constituency for a lot of this stuff, but the implementation is odd. And again, it also depends on how much longer Trump is willing to countenance being told over and over again that the markets are reacting badly to his latest pivot.
All right. Well, let's hear quickly from Shawn Fain. He is the president of United Auto Workers, and as we talked about earlier, he's on board with these tariffs.
Who I don't know, but wasn't a supporter, although the auto workers were big supporters. I watched him last night, and he said Donald Trump is absolutely right on tariffs. He said what he's doing on tariffs is an incredible thing, and it's about time somebody had the guts to do it, because we're going to save auto manufacturing. And I said to people when I was campaigning, you're going to have so many auto jobs, you're not going to believe what's going to happen.
President Trump there praising UAW President Shawn Fain, who came out in support of Trump's tariffs. And Shawn Fain joins us right now. So the president may have slightly misquoted you, but the essence is there. You have come out strongly in favor of his tariffs. Can you explain why?
Hey, thanks for having me, John. And look, yeah, it's simple for us. Look, we're in a crisis mode in this country. There is no single issue in this country that has affected our economy and working class people and their jobs than NAFTA, the USMCA, and our trade laws, our broken trade system. And we're in a crisis mode. And, we are triaging right now. So I hear this debate about, blanket tariffs and all this stuff. But look, we're in a triage situation. Tariffs are an attempt to stop the bleeding from the hemorrhaging of jobs in America for the last 33 years. So, and as we speak right now, decisions are still being made. Warren Truck Plant right here in Michigan, there's over 2,000 people laid off. And a simple decision, Stellantis is shifting truck production to Mexico. They could change overnight and move those trucks right back here to Warren, Michigan, and put people back to work. You have Deere workers in Racine, Wisconsin. We have Mack truck workers in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where the companies saying they're going to move their jobs to Mexico. So tariffs aren't the end solution, but they are a huge factor in creating and fixing this problem. And just to go.
So, I do think this is pretty significant. He was very critical of Trump on the campaign trail. Shawn Fain campaigned for Joe Biden, for Kamala Harris, pretty enthusiastically, but now he's turning around and endorsing Trump's, first key signature economic policy.
Yeah, he spoke at the Democratic convention, and he fulfilled what is the customary role of the major labor unions in supporting the Democratic nominee. That's been a little bit different as of late, with the rank and file probably becoming more Republican leaning than the leadership, but he carried on with what the leadership is basically expected to do. And so, yeah, I think this is a great political point for Trump to cite, especially when he's getting concern trolled over Wall Street having a negative reaction to what he's doing. He's saying, look, I'm doing this because organized labor is supportive, and that's the constituency I care about. They're the ones who want to return manufacturing jobs to Michigan or wherever. So it's pretty a salient point. But again, it comes down to the implementation. Like, I'm just unclear on where this is all supposed to lead, especially if you look at it in the context of like these broader, like globe spanning annexation plans. I get hung up on Trump citing William McKinley, who many people probably aren't familiar with his record as president, but he's the one who launched the Philippine War and the Spanish-American War on false pretenses and became the first imperialist president. meaning the first president to send U.S. troops abroad to engage in imperialist wars of conquest. And Trump seems like he likes that as a model. So do I think that there's going to be a ground war with Canada? No, but like it seems like there's a motive here that involves like the coercive acquisition of land and resources. You could even extend that to what the policy is in Ukraine, Gaza. It's actually somewhat coherent. So is it just about onshoring manufacturing jobs, or is there kind of some broader ideological goal here?
Yeah, I mean, there are fears in Canada that Trump basically just wants to ruin the Canadian economy so that he can take it over and make it the 51st state as planned.
Now, would you be in favor of that, Aaron? I know you're a native Canadian.
I would not. I would not. I mean, obviously, I'm a very Americanized Canadian. You know, American culture got to me very early. So, and I live in the U.S. now. But
so it wouldn't damage your pride.
It wouldn't damage my pride. But in terms of, you know, like, would my loved ones want to live under the American healthcare system, where now all of a sudden having healthcare in this country depends on whether you are employed and whether your employee offers you healthcare? No. I don't see. I
just want to see Trump having to negotiate with the Quebec separatists.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Good luck with that one.
Okay, well, let's turn to the Middle East, where the Trump administration also threw another curveball recently when they announced that they're negotiating directly with Hamas for the release of American hostages, the ones that remain inside Gaza. And Trump's hostage envoy, Adam Boehler, who spoke directly to Hamas officials, he went on CNN's State of the Union to speak to Jake Tapper. And Jake Tapper, as you can tell from the opening of this question, is not happy that the U.S. is now speaking directly to Hamas, going behind Israel's back.
Envoy Adam Boehler. Adam, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start on these direct negotiations with Hamas. First of all, obviously controversial to directly negotiate with terrorists. How much sign-off did you get from President Trump beforehand? And this is just my personal curiosity. As a Jewish American, did you have to steel yourself before sitting down to deal with people who are definitionally anti-Semitic murderers?
It's kind of a loaded question from Jake Tapper. Maybe showed a little bit too much of his own personal bias there. Jake Tapper, who has laundered so many Israeli lies that have been used to justify Israeli atrocities in Gaza, who has no problem speaking to all kinds of war criminals. In fact, kissing their feet, but not happy.
The immediate invocation of this guy being Jewish, which probably wouldn't have even occurred to me to even note, nor would I have done a lot of Googling to research where he got bar mitzvahed. Of course, that has to be front and center.
Yeah.
And how he had this psychological reaction or not to engaging with Hamas, as if his own personal feelings are what's paramount here. So it's a sleazy intro question.
As a follow, I could see Jake Tapper berating him for trying to get him to answer what Torah portion he read at his bar mitzvah. Did he really? Is he really devout? How could you possibly?
Did he get the blessing of a rabbi before he went to go meet with Hamas?
Yes. Really embarrassing. Really embarrassing.
Well, I'll say meeting with people, whether they're good people or bad people, is part of my job. I'm the special envoy. I need to go and have dialogue with anybody, and that includes a lot of people that I would classify as not so good people.
And of course, he has to be diplomatic because he's the hostage envoy, so he's not going to, adopt Jake Tapper's framing. And Jake Tapper wanted him, these are anti-Semitic murderers, and he, replies, "Yeah, I have to speak to some not so good people sometimes to free people." Jake Tapper, I don't think was expecting someone to be so to conceive of a world in which you have to talk to people and not just call them names.
But even the Biden administration, at the peak of the anti-Russia sentiment over Ukraine, had its own hostage negotiator go and facilitate these same sorts of potential exchanges, like with the Brittany Griner episode. And I don't remember Jake Tapper being in an uproar about whether it's kosher to meet with disreputable people abroad, because that's how obviously I think Jake Tapper would regard Russia. So there's no consistency here. It's also unclear how much the apparent willingness of at least this U.S. official to meet with Hamas with Trump's approval could transcend into some broader like policy framework in which Hamas can be kind of reincorporated into mediations and things. Like, does this mean now that the U.S. won't be still using Qatar as a mediator to talk to Hamas? Like, are they going to do full across the board direct contacts, or is it just in the slightly more narrow circumstance of hostage reacquisition? Yeah.
Good question. I mean, and just like the premise of Jake's question, that by definition, Hamas are anti-Semitic murderers. Why? Because like they attacked the occupying army that happens to, call itself the Jewish state. So if you kill any of their soldiers or their civilians, you're anti-Semitic. Like it just.
Well, it all goes back to, as you know, Aaron, the Hamas Charter of 1988. Yes. In which in which it's rejected that Israel has a right to exist. So
but they changed that charter since, and again
they did.
Not every single member is like duty bound by a charter written 30 years ago.
I mean, I don't think it seems pretty plausible to me that there are a bunch of Hamas members who are legitimately anti-Semitic, but like that's not really the issue. The issue is their conflict with Israel, and over time it's not inconceivable to me that they conflate Israel with lots of Jews writ large.
Sure. If you call yourself the Jewish state and you occupy and displace people in the name of Jews, you're gonna.
But the idea that this guy Adam Bowler is supposed to be like put first and foremost the fact that he is personally slighted by these people being potentially anti-Semitic, which again, not outside the question, although how anti-Semitic could you be if you're willing to have like cordial engagement with the representative of the United States, which is the sponsor of Israel, who happens to be Jewish? There's another clip of this guy on Fox News Sunday. I don't know if you guys saw it.
We're going to get to it. Well, first, let's hear more from his interview with Jake Tapper. Adam Bowler, U.S. hostage envoy, speaking to Jake Tapper. Let's go to the next clip, Wilson.
Axios' reporter Barak Ravid is reporting the top Israeli official, Ron Dermer, strongly discouraged you from talking directly with Hamas. He said it was a tense phone call. Tell us about that. Do you understand why Netanyahu, Dermer, others might be upset?
Again, Jake Tapper just wants to center the Israeli perspective.
Do you understand why they might be upset? Like, it's just like a melodrama in the way that Tapper is phrasing it. And look at his concerned look in this screen grab. Like he's devastated over this.
Jake Tapper's really upset. And of course, why would they be upset? It's because they've let the hostages be kept in Gaza rather than negotiate a comprehensive deal to free them. And so this is the U.S. now saying, all right, Israel, forget it. Like, we're going behind your back. So yeah, of course they're upset because they're being shown to, not on top of having no concern for civilian life among Palestinians in Gaza, also have no concern for their own hostages.
I do understand. I spoke with Ron, and I'm sympathetic. He has someone that he doesn't know well, making direct contact with Hamas. Maybe I would see them and say, look, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys. So he doesn't know me. And
Jake Tapper's mind is being blown because if he's referring to Hamas there, which I think he is, he's saying that the Hamas people he's spoken to don't have horns growing out of their heads. This might be news to Jake Tapper. And also, they are pretty nice guys, he says, of the Hamas officials he spoke to.
Yeah, I mean, this has to be close to the ultimate repudiation of the "we will never negotiate with terrorists" mantra from the Bush era, which Trump kind of did erode. And actually, others have eroded. Like Obama did meet with Raul Castro, Trump met with Kim Jong-un. So just this whole idea that you cannot ever meet with supposedly disreputable characters has been chipped away at, given geopolitical realities. But now with and then Trump, remember, he was going to invite the Taliban to Camp David until that was scuttled in 2019. So obviously he doesn't buy into there being this taboo against just the mere talking to these players. But talking to Hamas kind of takes it to another level. Again, it's going to be necessary to see how that translates to the broader policy approach, because I mean, you can talk to Hamas till the cows come home, but I tend to doubt you're going to convince them to accept like the U.S. turning Gaza into a military protectorate or something, and building casinos. So
let's finish this clip out from Adam Bowler.
There are big stakes. He lives in a country where if it sets certain precedents, then it will hurt or help a lot of other people. So I understand the consternation and the concern, and I wasn't upset. At the same time, we're the United States. We're not an agent of Israel. We have specific interests at play, and we did communicate back and forth.
Okay, now Jake Tapper's mind is absolutely blown. The fact that a U.S. official will say we're not an agent of Israel, when I do believe that Jake Tapper considers himself to be a de facto apostle of Israel, like because he's always doing its bidding. He's very proudly an Israel supporter. So the fact that a U.S. official would say openly we're not an agent of Israel, that to me just does not compute.
But again, the terms of this exchange are so stupid. Like Adam Bowler after saying, I wasn't personally upset about Ron Dermer expressing his concerns to me. It's like they're talking about it as though they're at the high school cafeteria.
Yes, they are. Well, we're over time, but we'll give you a little bit more of Adam Bowler's media tour. Here he is on Fox News Sunday.
So the president put up a stark warning on social media with regard to Hamas and getting the hostages out. He said, turn them over or it's immediately over for you. He says a beautiful future awaits. But if you don't turn over the hostages, you are dead. Release the hostages now or there will be hell to pay later. What's the deadline and what's the hell to pay?
He didn't set a deadline, but let me just look at when he's done it before. I remember actually a week ago, I was in Baghdad, and there's a little mark of the spot right where al-Salamani's car with an Iraqi in it, right where it was hit by 2 missiles. And there's a spot. We all got out to look at it. And I remember the day he did it. I actually happened to be the West Wing, but it was surprising. No one else would do it because they were afraid. And this is what I will say. It may seem like he makes empty threats until he carries out the threat. And then it's not so empty, and then you're dead. And so I think in these situations, and he's done the same thing with Iran, they are walking a line on Iran because it's not so hard for us to partner with Israel and take out that nuclear capability, which probably should do.
Well, several examples, as you note, the president's action come to mind. Adam Bowler, thank you for your time.
So there's Adam Bowler reassuring the Fox News audience that don't worry, our president is still a tough guy.
So that appearance was a little bit more ominous. He ends with saying it would be easy for the U.S. to, along with Israel, go to war with Iran, and we probably should. So he's expressing, I guess, his support for doing this, and he's reminiscing fondly about Trump drone striking Soleimani, and he's basically giving a slightly more articulate interpretation of that pretty wild Trump Truth Social post. That's one of his more wild posts that I can recall.
Yes.
Shalom Hamas. When it started with Shalom Hamas, I knew we were in for a treat. So yeah, that's why I kind of think it's prudent to emphasize the meeting with Hamas does break with a lot of conventions around what's permissible in U.S. foreign policy. But then if it's leading up to like, I don't know, joint U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, then maybe it doesn't really mean all that much at the end of the day.
This administration will really give you whiplash. On one network, on CNN, he's lecturing Jake Tapper about how it's okay to talk to Hamas and they're nice guys and like we're not an agent of Israel. It's refreshing to hear that. Then he goes on Fox News and all of a sudden he's saying, yeah, I think it's a good idea for us to partner with Israel and bomb Iran. It was so wonderful what we did in assassinating Qasem Soleimani. Let's take it to the next level. So it's hard to keep up, but it certainly is really there's a lot of material to work with. Very, very engaging and very interesting times we're in. Michael,
yes,
we're out of time.
Plenty of material, that's for sure.
Right. Michael, we're out of time. Thank you so much for sitting in today for Katie. People can find you at mtracy.net. That's your Substack, which I highly recommend. Anything else you want to plug or say as we say goodbye?
I'd like to sing you a song, Aaron. No,
Really?
it's fine.
Okay,
No, it's fine.
okay.
I'm not gonna sing. I'm not gonna sing. It's too early. I haven't done my vocal exercises. Yeah, you can go to M Tracey on X, obviously. I also have a modest YouTube presence, so that's
Very
it's
much.
also M Tracey on YouTube. Just done a bunch of stuff for System Update recently, so if you watch that, you can find some recent offerings, and that's about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for sitting in today. And thanks so much to your audience for tuning in. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks for watching Monday morning. We'll see you next time.